Right, I'm going to do a quick, hopefully 5-minute guide to the road safety audit that was done for the diversions around the Rozelle interchange. And I'm going to base this on the Austroads Guides Road Safety Audit Part 6, Managing Road Safety Audits. And the reason I'm doing this is because I saw a response from the Department of Planning about the diversion, and what they said was that these were subject to a detailed safety audit. And the outcomes of that audit have informed the details of all changes to footpaths, etc. So that's a nice motherhood statement. And what I wanted to do was to do a dive into that, essentially peel the onion, because what exactly does a road safety audit involve, and what was done here? Because it's not just good enough to say, oh, we did a road safety audit. What were the details of that? Because clearly the outcomes that we currently have are not very good. So if the audit was done well, then the outcomes would have been good. Well, okay, the audit might have been done perfectly fine, but the findings from that audit were never implemented. I mean, what's going on here? So that's why I'm just doing this dive into it. I'm going to do a much more detailed dive, where I'll actually go into the guide and pick through some bits and pieces of it and try and relate them to what's going on the ground. But anyway, let's just have a look at some questions I've come up with and why I've come up with these questions. So the first thing is, who was the sponsor of the audit? And this is important because it's important to know who came up with this. Was it Transport for New South Wales? Was it the RMS? Was it the Department of Planning? Because they're the people that decide what the scope is going to be. Who was the client? Was the client John Holland, or was the client Department of Planning or whoever? When was the audit carried out? Was it done as part of the kind of pre-feasibility stage a long time ago, and they've therefore had plenty of time to implement the recommendations or the findings from the audit? Or was it done like a month ago and they've been running around like headless chooks trying to implement the findings ever since? Because certainly from what I've seen riding through and all the social media commentary, etc., there's a lot of problems in the diversion that's been put in place. I mean, just awful hazards that have been left in place. So if the audit was carried out 6 months ago, why have the findings not been properly implemented? Was the traffic plan included in the audit scope? And the reason for this is, when you do a road safety audit, you're supposed to have all this documentation handed over, plans, maps, all sorts of stuff. And one of the things the audit does, if it's done at the correct stage, is it checks that the designs you're doing are using the most up-to-date and correct standards. It actually says that in the guide, that's what you're supposed to check. So if the traffic plan was not included in the scope, that would explain why things like the 2009 versions, the superseded versions of documentation were used, and why more recent documentation on things like bicycle wayfinding was just completely not used in preparing the traffic plan. Or was the scope done before the traffic plan, so therefore there was no opportunity for the audit to review the traffic plan? What did the audit scope cover? We did a road safety audit. Well, that's great. What was in the scope? I'll give you an analogy here of asking a teenager to clean the bathroom. I'll go clean the bathroom, and then they come out, 5 minutes later, I've cleaned the bathroom. You go, oh great. And you go in an hour later, it's like, what did you do? I hung the towels up. Sorry. What their view of the scope is completely different to what your view of the scope is. Did they restock the toilet rolls? Did they pint clean the toilet? Did they spray and wipe the shower screen? Did they Windex the mirrors? Did they wipe down the sink? Did they clean molds? Did they mop the floor? There's that's why scope is important, because just saying I clean the bathroom could be an extremely narrow, small number of tasks, or it could be quite a wide thing, and that's why I'd like to know what was in the scope. Okay, who drafted and issued the scope or the audit brief? And again, that's important because that kind of defines what they were actually looking at, and you can kind of drive the outcomes you're going to get from an audit by adjusting the scope at the very start. I actually studied audit for a year. I did a commerce degree as an aside. It's one reason why I never became an accountant, because a year of audit was enough to completely ever put me off following that career. Sorry if there's any auditors watching, but we spent weeks studying stuff like preparing the scope of the audit. To be a road safety auditor, yeah, you've got to have lots of experience as a road engineer, but it's only a 2-day course. Okay, what was the statement of the expected outcome of the audit? I mean, that is I've lifted that straight from the guide, and I guess from a cyclist perspective, it's important to know is, well, what were they actually looking at here? Was the audit designed to look at safe truck movements on the whole, and cycling was just kind of an afterthought or left out? Or was it specifically aimed at dealing with cycling issues? I'm already over 5 minutes, sorry. Was the audit carried out in accordance with a recognised guidance document? Again, that's straight out of the Austroads stuff. And I'd expect it to be using either Part 6 or Part 6A of the Austroads Audit Guide. All right. Who was engaged to carry out the audit? Was it a specialist outside firm? Was it a division within John Holland? Was it someone from the RMS? Because that leads on to the next question: is how was their independence guaranteed? And I'll give you an example of this. Is let's say this project has got a $3.9 billion budget. That's my squeaky chair, by the way. And let's say in a year's time they come along and go, oh look, we've just like the light rail, we've had a $500 million blowout. What's the government going to do? Oh, well, we want to check the finances to make sure that your $500 million claim is valid. Now, would they say, oh, John Holland, we're quite happy for your internal finance department to review the numbers and come back with a statement as to whether they're correct? I don't think so. I think they'd be saying, we're going to engage an external accounting firm to come and have a look. Who audits your books? Oh, Arthur Andersen. And I can say Arthur Andersen because I went broke years ago. Right, we're going to use any large accounting firm except Arthur Andersen because there could be a conflict of interest there. And again, this is very important for an audit. If I watched a webinar that Austroads did recently, and they're really hammering home at the moment the importance of independence of the auditor. So how independent were they? Now, did the audit team include a specialist advisor? And again, I've lifted this term straight from the Austroads guide, and that would in this area be a cyclist with specialist local knowledge. And they actually talk about people with specialist local knowledge that they should be brought onto the audit team. And that could be a local cyclist from Leichhardt, Bayberg, or Bicycle New South Wales, or whoever. Right, who has received a copy of the audit and the responses to the findings? Because what you've got to realise is it's not all about just doing an audit. The person, if I receive the audit and it's got all these recommendations in it, I need to respond in writing to the findings. They might say, oh, you need to move that power pole. Now you need to write down, finding accepted, or I do not accept the finding on, for the following reasons, and that has to be documented. So who was it that responded to the audit report? Again, RMS, John Holland, Transport for New South Wales, somebody else. Were all the audit findings accepted? Because remember, we go back to that motherhood statement from the Department of Planning. Oh, we did a road safety audit. Great. They might have come out with 20 findings. Great. They might have not accepted all 20 findings. And that's why we've ended up in the mess we're in. This stuff, this kind of detail is important. Were all the audit recommendations implemented prior to the diversion opening? Again, I've lifted that from the road safety stuff, the Austroads guide. You're actually supposed to implement all of the findings, all the recommendations that you accept prior to the diversion opening. And as we've seen from people going through diversion and finding all sorts of hazards, either those hazards were not picked up in the audit, or those hazards have arisen since the audit was done, or the recommendations to fix those hazards were never implemented. This is turning into a 10-minute guide, sorry. So who signed off on the corrective action report, the CAR? Who has ensured all the agreed actions have been followed through? That's what I was just getting at with that last point. Were ride-throughs done on different types of bicycles? And that actually says in the guide that depending on the type of audit you're doing, like if you're doing an audit for truck movements, you must drive through in a truck. And you must drive through in a truck a type of truck that you're actually doing. So it's no use if you're going to be running B doubles through an area, going through in like a little, 2-ton delivery truck. You've actually got to drive through in a B double and see what it's like in that. Similarly, if you're doing a road safety audit specifically for motorcyclists, you go and ride through on a motorcycle, because motorcyclists have the same kind of issues cyclists do with road surfaces and stuff like that. But I would have thought, well, you'd want to be looking at different types of bicycles, not just a hybrid or a road bike, or if these people don't cycle, they'd probably want to do it on an e-bike. But what about doing on a trike or a cargo bike, or a bike with a kid on the back kind of thing? Where ride throughs done day and night, and again that's in the guide. You have to do that. Which findings were annotated is important. Now, when you find hazards and you come up with findings, depending on the various scales of things, some of them get flagged as important, and they're the ones that you have to fix. How many treatments were primary treatments? And again, that's straight out of the guide of actually fixing things to a high standard. Well, I won't go into it, that'll be in the longer guide. Did the audit check that the TTAMP used up-to-date Austroads guides and standards? Well, somehow outdated, superseded guides and standards were used, so I guess they didn't. Is it still believed by whoever, Department of Planning, whatever, that the diversion operates right the first time? And again, that's taken straight out of the Austroads guide, that's the expectation, that one of the ideas of doing an audit is to make sure when a road opens, it works. I remember when the WestConnex opened, well actually I ride past the opening, but when the first bit opened, there was all this stuff on the news about people driving up to the entrance to the tunnel and going, oh, I'm in the wrong lane, and then reversing back a ridiculous distance to then avoid paying the toll. To me, that was very clearly, it didn't work, did it? And they had to go back and change signage and lane markings, etc., to make sure that people got out of those lanes if they didn't want to go through the tunnel. Okay, next section. Will the audit report be made available to anyone who suffers injury through either a Freedom of Information inquiry or discovery during litigation? And again, that's straight out of the Austroads guides. This is the reason everything has to be done in writing, because this may end up being used in court. Which relevant cyclist user group provided a member to work on the audit team? Again, that's out of the guides, is that you can actually bring people in with specialist knowledge who aren't road engineers, etc., to work on an audit. Did the audit consider surface conditions which more seriously affect cyclists? Again, taken out of the audit guide. Was a pre-opening audit carried out via a ride-through as an acceptance procedure on behalf of the travelling public? I didn't write that. Again, I've just lifted that. But obviously on the day before the diversion opened, they should have been riding through doing a pre-opening audit. I mean, that's what they do on roads before the WestConnex tunnel opens. Obviously, they're going to drive through it multiple times, checking that everything works. Was this done on a bicycle? Did this include a nighttime pre-opening audit? Okay, and then last question, were all audit findings and treatment options categorised by their safe system alignment? And I've put this one in here because clearly the traffic plan seems to have completely missed all the safe system stuff, because it's been using, on the face of it, the 2009 Austroads guides, which were all written before safe systems became a thing, and was then written in later on into all Austroads guides. So was that done as part of the audit? And if not, well, I guess why not? Anyway, I've definitely gone over 5 minutes, but hopefully that's given you some insight into the kind of questions that should be asked about this road safety audit. So we can get to the bottom of, well, why is the diversion not up to scratch?